And so we're just going to pick it up here. Verse 1, it says, "And on that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther has told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And Esther spake yet again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he devised against the Jews. Then the king held out his golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, If it please the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seem right before the king, and I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that shall come into my people, and how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? And then the king Ahasuerus said unto Esther the queen, and to Mordecai the Jew, Behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him they have hanged upon the gallows, because he laid his hand upon the Jews. Write you also for the Jews, as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name, and sealed with the king's ring, may no man reverse. And then were the king's scribes called at that time, at the 3rd month, that is the month of Sivan, and the 23rd day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and to the deputies, and the rulers of the provinces, which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and to the Jews according to their writing, and according to their language. And he wrote it in the king Ahasuerus' name, and he sealed it with the king's ring. And he sent letters by post on horseback, and riders on mules, and camels, and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews which were in every city to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day, and all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all the people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. And so the post that rode upon the mules and camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. And the decree was given at Shushan the palace. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel, of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. And the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. And in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day. And many of the people of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews fell upon them. And so obviously in the last chapter, the problem of Haman himself was dealt with. And so in chapter 8, Haman obviously is no more an issue. But they had to deal with the legacy of Haman. And that was kind of the problem that was just kind of lingering. Because even though Haman himself was dead, there still was an issue with his house. And then obviously the bigger issue was the proclamation, because the proclamation did not end with the death of Haman. Yes, he was the one who wrote it, but with the seal of the king, which it had, it didn't matter. It didn't matter if Haman lived or not. That proclamation was set in stone. And so they had to deal with these two things. Now, with regards to his house, it was actually a Persian law that said if there was a traitor against the nation, in particular a traitor who was executed, that the estate of that man was forfeited to the king. The king could do with it whatever he wanted. And so yes, Haman still had relatives alive. He still had a wife. He had children. He had friends, all these people who maybe could have taken that estate over. Per the law of the land, it went to the king, in this case Ahasuerus, and he would do with it whatever he wanted. And so essentially what we have here is a continuation of the irony that we have seen, in particular with the Haman-Mordecai story. And so, Haman has the gallows built for Mordecai. Haman himself was the one hung on the gallows. Haman boasts about his riches and, his estate, his family and all that. Well, now all of that is given over to Ahasuerus, and then through him to Esther, and then eventually Esther places Mordecai over it. Right? And so there's this continual irony with regards to, you have this enemy of the people of God, and God makes a show of him at every possible turn. And that's going to come into play really at the end of this chapter, And so we'll talk more about that in a minute. But so Ahasuerus is now technically the ruler of the state of Haman. And so he gives that over to Esther. And then Esther brings in Mordecai, and it says that that Mordecai in verse 1 came before the king. Now, so she's presenting him to the king, but obviously Ahasuerus knows who Mordecai is, right? I mean, this is right on the heels of him desiring to honor Mordecai, and another ironic twist, having Haman be the one to lead the procession that was honoring Mordecai. So he obviously knows who he is, but the reveal here is not, hey, here's this man Mordecai. The reveal is who Mordecai is to Esther, right? And so there is a relation there that nobody knew about. And so she reveals this relationship of Mordecai, and I'm sure to Ahasuerus that was probably quite the reveal, right? Now, I think it's pretty clear that he has a sincere love for Esther. He obviously has an affection for Mordecai because this is the guy who saved his life for all practical purposes. So to find out that there was a relation there was probably, quite the fun thing for him. And so she presents him, she reveals their relationship, and then the king takes his ring, and the text says, which he had taken from Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai. Now, this isn't just a show. This isn't just a sign of affection or anything like that. This was a sign that the position that Haman held was now given to Mordecai. And so again, everything that Haman had was taken from Haman and given to Mordecai, even down to the very position that he held in the nation of Persia. And so Esther then, to put the cap on it all, she set Mordecai over the house of Haman. And so as we've talked about, Haman is probably the greatest illustration in all the Bible of pride coming before fall, right? And Haman really epitomizes that particular concept. But we also see this in Ecclesiastes 12. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And then he says this, for God shall bring every work into judgment with every secret thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. Now keep in mind, that this dislike, this hatred that Haman had for Mordecai was not necessarily something that he published to everybody. His family knew about it. His friends knew about it, but that's certainly not what he told Ahasuerus, right? He just told him, hey, there's this people and they're a drain on your resources. It would be better for you. It would be better for the kingdom if they were here. He kind of gave a backdoor reason as to what he really wanted, which was the extermination of the Jewish people. Not for anything really other than his personal hatred. And so here, what he thought was the secret thing was not secret from God. It was revealed. And so God shall bring every work into judgment. And again, this always happens. It might not necessarily happen as boldly or as loudly or as obviously as it happened with Haman. But it always happens. God always brings judgment. And so this is something that we need to keep in mind. There is no such thing as a secret sin, right? Even if no other human knows about it, God most certainly does. And so it's something that we as Christians in particular need to always keep in mind. Now that was his house. Now, as I said earlier, the bigger issue was the proclamation, right? That still hung in the air. That was still the biggest problem facing not just the Jews, but Esther and Mordecai. And so she comes to make another request of the king. Now, and I'll just say this just quickly. It says in verse 4 that the king held out the golden scepter. And so we don't know if this was another instance where she had to make an uninvited appearance before the king. That doesn't seem to be the case here. And so there are some who say that the golden scepter was just Ahasuerus' way now of saying basically she has the floor. And it could be that this was another sense wherein she was uninvited, and unless he hands out the golden scepter, she could have been killed. But the stakes are much less now. She has a stronger relationship with him. There wouldn't be any real fear of him not doing that if that were the case. But nevertheless, she does come to Ahasuerus, and she pleads with him, and she cries out. So she falls at his feet, and she begins asking for this. And she says, "Let it be written to reverse the letters." Now, either Esther is unaware of just how set in stone that proclamation would have been with the seal of the king, or by this, she meant what is going to happen. Let there be another proclamation made that would kind of help offset the other one. Either way, she says, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. And then she says this, for how can I endure to see the evil that shall come upon my people, or how can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Now think about this. Esther could have come to Ahasuerus and just said, let me and Mordecai live. I'm your queen. He's now, most people think the vizier is the title that Mordecai now held. No matter what it was a very high position, right? We hold high positions in this kingdom. It would not do well for you to have us executed. She could have done that. She could have just said, just spare us, right? It's just two of us. Just spare us. But that's not what she does. She comes and she says, how can I see this evil come among my people? How can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? And so she comes to him asking for a very difficult thing. All right? And again, it's hard for us to kind of envision just how much of a difficult spot Ahasuerus was in since that first proclamation was written. She is not asking for an easy thing. She knows that, but she is asking for the right thing. And so again, I think Esther here shows us a tremendous amount of courage and wisdom, and even tact again, for the way she approaches Ahasuerus and asks for this very difficult thing to be done. There's a two-step solution to this. There's a two-step solution to help the Jewish people in the nation of Persia. The first one was already taken care of, which was to get rid of their enemy. Right? Haman was dealt with. And Ahasuerus even mentions this. It says in verse 7, he said, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and him have they hanged upon the gallows because he laid his hand upon the Jews. What I think he's doing by saying this, obviously Esther knows this. He's not giving her new information. I think what Ahasuerus is saying is, if I have done that, do you not think I will do everything I can? Right? I think that's what he's saying by mentioning, hey, I've already killed the man. I'm going to do everything I can to help save you and your people. And so that was taken care of. Step 2 is the more difficult task, which was finding a way to circumvent the decree, which was calling for the death of the Jews, which Ahasuerus himself says, may no man reverse. Right? And so we've been saying this all along. Ahasuerus himself could not write a proclamation, even sealed with his ring, which just says, canceling the first one, right? He can't do that. It cannot be reversed. And so to do this, he does really the only thing that could be done. He basically gives Mordecai and Esther the same opportunity that he gave Haman originally, right? Haman was the one who wrote the original proclamation. And so here he tells Esther and Mordecai, you write a new one, whatever you want. Basically, they have a blank slate to write whatever kind of proclamation they want that in their mind would help solidify the Jewish position. And so they write this new decree. Now, the original decree, for all practical purposes, what it said is any Persian citizen can kill a Jew, take the spoil, and you cannot be, you can't be punished for this. You can't be tried for this. It is not illegal. On this one day, you can go out and you can murder as many as you want, and it cannot count against you. Right? There is no punishment that will come against you. You can kill any Jewish person you want, take the spoil. And so the new decree then, which was probably the best way to go, the new decree said that the Jews were allowed to gather themselves together and to stand for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. And so again, it can't undo the first one. And so when this day would come, it would still be legal for any Persian to kill a Jewish person and to take the spoil from them, and they would still not be tried for it. That was still on the books. But essentially what they did now is to say that the Jews can gather together and defend themselves, and if they kill you because you tried to kill them, now they can take your spoil. All right? And so it essentially what this did is it leveled the playing field. And it did a little bit more than that, because this is coming out several months, again, before the day in which all this was to take place. And so now they not only have time to get ready, but they have, you think about if you knew this day was coming, right? If somehow they signed an amendment to the Constitution right now that said in a year's time from now, all right, people can come in and they can kill American citizens. Well, guess what us American citizens are going to do? We're going to gather together. I guarantee you militias are going to form. We're going to put together a game plan, right? There's going to be a lot of serious planning going into this. And that's what it allowed them to do, right? The smart thing to do is they're not going to be scattered. They're going to gather together. They're going to find a defensible position, and they're going to put forth the best fight that they can. And so it gave them the opportunity to strategize and come up with a way to do this. And so, it was still legal for somebody to kill them. But before, you had no risk because they couldn't do anything to you. Now you're taking a tremendous risk to try, right? And so, again, this was the best thing that they could do. They leveled the playing field. And so Brenneman, he said, and yet another reversal motif. And again, we've seen this at every step of the way. And yet another reversal motif. Mordecai wrote an edict of life for the Jews, whereas Haman had written an edict of death for the Jews. And so again, throughout the whole book, everything that Haman did was undone essentially by Mordecai. But of course, we know it was God through Mordecai. And then per the command of Ahasuerus, this new proclamation was sent out as quickly as they could disseminate it, right? And they had a big empire, 127 provinces, a lot of land to cover, but they got the information out as fast as they could. And every language that was spoken in the kingdom, they made sure that this information got to all the people as best as they could. And then we see the end of the chapter here, verse 15. And Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel, blue and white, with a great crown of gold, with a garment of fine linen and purple, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. There's a lot of reversal happening here. Way back in chapter 3, in verse 15, this is when the first proclamation was written. It said, the post went out, being hastened by the king's commandment. So we have kind of the same situation happening here. And the decree was given in Shushan the palace, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city, Shushan, was perplexed. Right? They didn't, why are you doing this? Why is this even being allowed to happen? Well, what's happening now? Again, verse 15. What happens now is the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. Right? There was an overturning. And I find it interesting that notice, we'll get to the Jews in the next verse. This isn't speaking about the Jewish people. This says the city of Shushan. This is the king's abode, right? This is where he is living, and the people of his abode. They are the ones who are thrilled about this. They rejoiced. They were glad, and so there was a genuine concern, and I would go so far to say a love and a care from many of the Jewish people who were there in the nation, at least by the people who were in Shushan. And so they rejoiced, they were glad. And then furthermore, verse 16, it says the Jews, what happened to them? They had light and gladness and joy and honor. And so again, we see a complete reversal of everything. Haman, we understand this. Haman desired glory. He wanted to be lauded. He wanted people to look up to him. He wanted people to see him as something that they were not. He thought he was greater. He thought everyone was lesser. The whole thing started because Mordecai just refused to bow down to him, right? And so now he wanted all the glory. He wanted all the honor. Well, now Mordecai's the one who, even though he was not seeking it, received it, right? Mordecai wasn't looking for it, and yet he's the one who now has it. And so now there was perplexion. There was when it came to the Jews. The text earlier said that they were fasting, that there was weeping, that there was wailing. It says that many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Right, and now they had light, they had gladness, they had joy, they had honor. And then it goes even beyond that. We see in verse 17, and in every province, in every city, it says that the Jews had joy and gladness. It says a feast, they had a good day. Many of the people of the land became Jews, for fear of the Jews fell upon them. And so there's celebrations taking place. There's actual Gentiles in the nation of Persia who are proselytizing over and becoming Jews, or at least practicing the Jewish religion. And so all of this was taking place. There was great rejoicing. And it's interesting because, and I like the way that Kyle says this. He says that the reason why this was taking place is because the Gentiles in Persia could see what the book of Esther has made so abundantly clear. Again, as we said along, God's name was not mentioned, but his hand has been seen. And the Gentiles in Persia could see this, and it contrasted with the vanity and misery of polytheism, to which even the heathen themselves were not blind. In other words, they're looking around and thinking, hey, we're serving all of our gods, and our gods have never done for us what their God did for them. Right? They could see that is so obvious to the people in Persia. Hold on, their God has done something for them. Right? There was a death sentence upon them that nobody thought could be undone, and yet here they stand. Right? And so this was something that was so obvious to them that they began converting over. Now I want to close with this because it's fascinating. All of this rejoicing, these celebrations, they institute something. We'll talk about that more in the later chapters as far as celebrations for the Jews that they still celebrate today. But these celebrations that were happening were taking place before the day actually took place. They were celebrating, and yet that fated day had not happened yet. And so there was rejoicing, even though the victory had not physically come yet. Right? And so they were in an interesting position. And why I bring that up at all is because we kind of stand in a similar situation today. Even though we wait on our future and what we might call our full salvation. Yes, we have been saved, but we don't receive our full salvation until we are in glory and we receive our glorified bodies. We still wait on that, but we can still now rejoice, even though that hasn't yet taken place. We can still now rejoice because of what God has done for us and because of the victory He's already won for us. Right? We can, just like the Jews in Persia, we can rejoice now. And just a couple of verses on this, Philippians 1:6. Being confident of this very thing, that He which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. And then 1 Corinthians 15:57, but thanks be to God which giveth us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. What does that mean? Are we going to have victory in eternity? You bet we will. But that doesn't mean we don't already have victory now. Right? And so we will receive our full salvation then, but we can go ahead and rejoice now because the salvation is guaranteed. It is guaranteed. And so just like the Jews in Persia, the day had not yet come, but the rejoicing was already taking place. So too can you and I, as a child of God, rejoice for the victory that He's given us. So again, just really, really incredible truths and relatable truths that we see in this book of Esther, in the book where God's name is never even mentioned. Such a fascinating book. All right.